Parents demanded my wedding savings for my entitled sister's big day. Now she's furious I cut her out. I, 28 female, have always had the worst relationship with my sister, Nina, since we were young. For context, my parents have always favored Nina over me and never even bothered to hide their favoritism in the family. Nina was their golden child and she used that to her advantage every day. She could have murdered someone and my parents would have tried to justify her actions. My sister was an absolute to me while we were growing up. She was 1 year older than me and would take every chance to make my life miserable. I was the girly of the two of us and loved learning and applying makeup just like my mom. Nina hated that and would knowingly borrow my things without asking and often accidentally ruin them. If I confronted her about it, she would play the innocent victim and tell me how as sisters we should be sharing. She would always find a way to belittle me in front of my family. If I achieved something or tried to share my accomplishments, she would dismiss them by saying how it wasn't such a big deal and I should stop bragging. She would then try to overshadow me with her own achievements and would rub it to my face. Everything seemed like a constant competition while living with her. When we turned into teenagers, she would sneak out in the middle of the night for parties and call me to pick her up whenever she was drunk, which was quite often. If I refused, she would threaten that she would tell all my friends embarrassing stories from my childhood. It's important to note that because we were just a year apart, we studied in the same school and had a lot of mutual friends. Like any other teenager, I didn't want to be teased or bullied, so I would reluctantly comply with her demands. Nina also had a talent for gaslighting everyone. She would twist stories and manipulate situations to make her look like a good person and anybody else would be the bad guy. I remember every time she wanted to break up with an ex-boyfriend, she would use me as an excuse. She would lie and tell them how I had spilled to our parents about her relationship and our parents didn't want her to date anyone, so she had to break up with them. As ridiculous as her lies were, I don't know how those guys were dumb enough to believe her. They would instead resent me for trying to come in between them and Nina. She would manipulate our parents any time she wanted me to do something and things didn't go her way. I would try to defend myself, but it started to get exhausting when she was so adept at painting herself as the victim. Her insensitivity would reach its peak whenever I was going through any tough time emotionally. Instead of offering support, she would mock me and say how no one liked girls who cried so much and that this is why no guy wanted to be with me. She knew exactly which buttons to push to hurt me the most. Once I really liked a guy when we were in school. Being an introvert, I was biding my time to approach him and probably ask him out on a date. I had told this to only my best friend, Alyssa, at that time. One day Alyssa, me, and my sister were walking back home together when Alyssa teased me about the guy. My eyes widened in shock and Alyssa must have realized her mistake because she immediately shut up, but it was too late. My sister had already heard and that night she asked me if I liked the guy. I straight up told her yes I did and that I didn't want her to tell anyone about this. Nina nodded and I thought that would be the end of the matter. However, the very next day, I noticed Nina getting extra flirty with this guy in the hallway. My stomach dropped as I noticed her touching his arm slightly while talking to him and getting very close to his face. Feeling betrayed and frustrated, I couldn't believe Nina would stoop so low. She was clearly flirting with him, knowing that I would notice and be hurt by it. The guy, being an introvert and geek himself, seemed confused as well and kept looking around to see if this was a prank of some sort. It was embarrassing, to say the least. Later, when I confronted Nina about it, asking her why she would do such a thing, she just shrugged it off, claiming she was being friendly and that she had just noticed for the first time how cute he was after I had admitted my crush on him. I knew Nina was a pick-me girl and she would do anything to get something that I wanted. Just like I thought, Nina would talk to him every chance she got and make me resent her more and more. As if that wasn't enough, Nina spread rumors about me having a crush on the guy. It became the talk of the school, and everyone started teasing me about him. I tried my best to keep my cool, but the constant whispers and giggles behind my back made me feel humiliated. I knew how Nina's mind worked, so instead of showing her how much it bothered me that she would talk and flirt with the guy I liked, I started to outright ignore her and pretend like it didn't bother me anymore. If I noticed Nina knowingly standing in the hallway talking to him while batting her eyes at him, I would walk past them like they didn't exist. She told me a week later that the guy had asked her out and if I was okay with her saying yes to him, and I just shrugged. I told her, trying to play it cool, that I had lost all interest in the guy after realizing that he has such a bad taste in women and she was welcome to go out with him. Nina fumed hearing my words, but I had the last laugh when she came back from the date miserable and looking bored. I heard her complaining to her friends on the phone about how the guy kept talking about books, something she clearly wasn't interested in. They didn't have a single meaningful conversation and never went out again. Inwardly, I reveled in the sweet taste of victory. It was a small triumph, but it proved a point. Nina only wanted to go out with him to get back with me, when in reality she never liked him for who he was. I remember when it was prom time at my school, I was quite excited like any other teenager. Unexpectedly, out of nowhere, Thomas, who was then the captain of the football team, asked me if I would like to accompany him to the prom. I was shocked, to say the least, since this was a big deal and I had no idea he had a crush on a girl like me. Despite my reservations, I decided to take a chance and say yes. The news spread like wildfire and my sister eventually found out from our mutual friends. Instead of being happy for me, that evening, she mocked me, saying how Thomas probably lost a bet and hence he had been forced to take me out. I ignored her, but she continued to mock how maybe Thomas wanted to sleep with a virgin like me so he could brag about it with his friends. I got pissed hearing this and told her how not every guy wants to go out with a tramp like her and she had no right to comment about Thomas or me. When prom night came, it was an absolutely delightful night. Thomas and I had a good time, and it was then that he confessed how he had always had a crush on me, but because I was so much nerdier and got better marks than him, he didn't know if I would be interested in a guy like him. He went on to say how he had wanted to ask me out for a long time but was afraid of rejection. The way he was nervous and the sincerity in his eyes made me realize that he was telling the truth. I guess this was the first time I felt seen for exactly who I was, since I was always in the shadow of my sister. Thomas and I started dating eventually, and it's been a blissful 12 years that we have been together. I can say with the utmost confidence that he is the love of my life. This might sound even more cliché, but we are perfect together. We have stayed together through thick and thin, come what may. My parents have also been quite supportive about our relationship. The only one who had issues with us was my sister. Every time Thomas came home to have dinner with us, Nina would tell him about my childhood stories, like how I would wet the bed or how I was afraid of spiders. She would then laugh like it was the funniest thing in the world while watching me blush in embarrassment. Thomas, for his part, never cared and would always comment how cute I was, which would piss Nina even more since her main aim was always to mock me. When she realized that she couldn't embarrass me in front of Thomas, she resorted to her old ways and flirted heavily with him whenever she got the chance. If I had called Thomas over to watch a movie in my room, she would barge in and say how she wanted to watch the movie with us. If we went out for a date, she would call and text me unnecessarily, and whenever I would ignore her, she would find an excuse to call Thomas. This was starting to get on my nerves in the beginning, but I trusted Thomas implicitly. He always knew how to shut her down and maintain a respectful boundary with her. One day when I was in college, Thomas, quite disturbed, sent me a bunch of screenshots showing how Nina had sent him explicitly inappropriate images, saying how she needed his advice on what type of lingerie to wear. This was the point when I realized that Nina's behavior had escalated to a level that demanded intervention. Shocked by the screenshots, I couldn't fathom how my sister could stoop so low. I immediately drove back home so I could confront her about it face to face. I had also asked Thomas to be there so we could speak to her together. As usual, Nina, with a nonchalant expression, dismissed it as a joke and claimed that I was overreacting. She looked at Thomas, perhaps for support, saying how lingerie is just like a bikini, so she just wanted his opinion as a male since she trusted him. I saw red seeing her lack of remorse and her attempt to gaslight us. I started yelling at her that my boyfriend wasn't her soundboard and that if she wanted to ask her opinion, she could ask her own friends or find herself a boyfriend. My parents rushed into our room, hearing me yell. I seldom raised my voice, so they knew something was wrong and asked us what the matter was. I immediately showed them all the photos that Thomas had sent me. Nina, still trying to act oblivious, smirked and said how it's not her fault if I was so insecure and that I needed to stop being so controlling. I yelled back that what she had done was inappropriate and that she needed to find someone in her own life to send these explicit images to, since Thomas wasn't comfortable with it. My mother, instead of backing me, started to speak up, saying this was a one-time incident anyway, so I should give my sister the benefit of the doubt and believe her that she didn't mean anything more from this. I retorted back that this anyway would never happen again, since Thomas had told me that he was blocking her if she didn't apologize and promised him to never do something like this again. Nina's eyes widened in shock upon hearing this, and she looked at Thomas, asking him if he was going to do that. This is when Thomas finally spoke up. Keeping a cool head as usual, he straight up told her that he didn't appreciate her sending such kind of pictures and that she had always made him feel uncomfortable with her over-friendliness, but he had kept his mouth shut since she was my sister. He continued to say how he saw no other choice but to block her permanently since she didn't respect his boundaries. Nina looked visibly taken aback by Thomas's straightforward response. She tried to play the victim, claiming that she was just joking and didn't mean any harm. However, Thomas stood firm in his decision, and until today, Nina has remained blocked on all his socials and contact list. These examples barely scratch the surface of the ways Nina was to me. It's been a constant battle with her, and the favoritism from our parents has only fueled her behavior. The toxic dynamic between us has made it challenging to even build any kind of positive relationship between us. As an adult now, I have watched my parents continue to do things for Nina that they have never done for me. For example, Nina can never hold down a job for a long time. She always gets fired for misbehavior or tardiness, which means she is unable to pay rent, so my parents, mainly my mother, readily offer her financial help. This is how it has always been, and I had accepted it will always remain this way, hence I chose to distance myself from my parents when I moved in with Thomas. Don't get me wrong, I do talk to my parents, but it's quite occasionally only, and whenever we talk, I avoid talking about Nina. Now coming to the story, 4 months ago, Thomas proposed to me during our anniversary dinner. He had everything planned out, with champagne, and a violin playing in the background, and it nearly brought me to tears. I said yes with all my heart, knowing that this was the man I wanted to spend the rest of my life with. When we told Thomas's parents, they were overjoyed and congratulated us. Next, we called my parents to give them the happy news, but when my parents heard the news, although my dad gave us a half-hearted congratulations, my mother kept quiet. Sensing something was wrong, I asked her about it, and she told me that she didn't want to spoil our evening and she would give me a call tomorrow. The next day, when my parents called, I asked her straight away why she wasn't happy for me. My mom then told me that Nina was supposed to get married next month and they didn't know whether to tell me or not since Nina hadn't invited me. I was shocked to hear this since I had wanted to invite her to my wedding, but I also understood that we had not been talking for years, so it made sense. I told my parents that it was okay for her to not invite me and that I was happy for her. My parents then went on to say how they were worried now that they might have to pay for my wedding when they were already worried about paying for my sister's. I told them that I didn't want them to pay for my wedding since me and Thomas had always talked about getting married, so we had been saving for a long time. My parents asked us how much and I told them. I knew it was a significant amount, but we had wanted a big wedding, so we had saved, keeping that in mind. My parents, hearing the amount, started saying how this was too much to spend on a wedding and that if I already had this much, then I could easily help Nina out. I was taken aback by my parents' suggestion. It seemed like they were implying that I should use the money we saved for our wedding to contribute to my sister Nina's wedding expenses. I calmly explained to them that Thomas and I had been planning and saving for our wedding for a long time, and I was not going to spend our money on my sister's wedding, especially when I was not even invited. I also pointed out that our wedding fund was just enough for one wedding and did not sponsor both of our weddings. My mother started to plead with me, saying that I should learn to share and that sisters are forever. I scoffed hearing her words and told her that Nina was definitely not my sister. She was just someone who I had to tolerate while we were growing up, and I hated being related to her. As the conversation escalated, my parents persisted, suggesting that the family should support each other and that it was my duty to help Nina. They told me that I could cancel my wedding and sponsor some part of Nina's wedding, and that they would convince Nina to invite me as her guest. Their selfish words struck a chord with me. After years of enduring favoritism and mistreatment, I realized that my parents had no remorse, just like my sister, for treating me poorly. They would rather have me sacrifice my wedding than not be able to provide for Nina's dream wedding. It was always Nina for them, and they didn't care about me. At that moment, I made a bold decision. I told my parents that if they couldn't be genuinely happy for me and support our decision to have the wedding we wanted, then I would prefer they not attend the ceremony. I didn't want negativity and toxicity overshadowing what was supposed to be a joyous occasion. Hearing this, they started protesting at how everyone would talk about this and that they didn't want to answer questions from their family about not being invited to my wedding, but I didn't want to listen to them any further. I stuck by my decision even though it was a very tough decision to not include my parents. Thomas and I talked and he understood exactly why I didn't invite them. Even though my parents kept texting me, I ignored them so I could focus on my life ahead with Thomas. We decided to have a big wedding like we had always dreamed about. Our wedding day turned out to be a huge success that was filled with love, laughter, and the company of those who truly cared about our well-being. We danced and drank to our heart's content. Since the wedding, I have received a lot of flack from my side of the family about not inviting my parents and Nina. Surprisingly, even Nina reached out to me saying how selfish I was for spending so much money when I could have easily helped her out during her wedding, but I have chosen to ignore her. Am I the a-hole for uninviting my parents and having a big wedding with the love of my life? Update 1. So guys, thank you so much for leaving so many positive comments under my post. I am truly grateful to see so many strangers support me. When I wrote this post, there were a lot of things going on in my mind. Because my parents and Nina have treated me so poorly all my life, I was starting to believe that I might have actually made a mistake by spending so much money on my wedding. I am glad I didn't listen to them, since I and Thomas had the best time with our loved ones. I think me and my parents need to have a chat about the blatant favoritism they have had for Nina all these years, but for now, I'm going to enjoy my honeymoon with my hubby. Update 2. It's been a month since my last update. There are a lot of new developments starting with Thomas, and I just moved into a much bigger place since our old place was starting to make us feel claustrophobic. I also needed a more spacious wardrobe, so this move couldn't have come at a better time. Now coming to my parents, I had a talk with them face to face last week regarding my wedding and their insane demand. They were not happy to see me, and my father was refusing to even speak to me, saying how I insulted him by not inviting him to our wedding, and as my father he should have been there to give me away. As much as I wanted to come up with a sarcastic reply listening to that, I needed to hold my patience since this was going to be a much deeper conversation. I started by telling my parents exactly how I remembered my childhood. I told them about all the times I was compared to Nina and how she would destroy my life, my friendships, and my relationship with Thomas. Before my mother could speak up to defend Nina, I asked them to let me speak my mind freely without getting interrupted, and my mother nodded. I told them how my whole life was always about Nina, even though we were both their daughters and they should have treated us equally. I knew that they were not completely blind to everything that had been going on, so I questioned them as to why they always preferred Nina over me and what made her the better daughter. This is when my parents told me how I was always the mature one of the two, while Nina was more emotional and threw tantrums if things didn't go her way, so when push came to shove, they would allow Nina to do whatever she wanted. They continued to say how over the years Nina has always needed them to rescue her from tough situations, while I was always independent and took care of myself, so they thought I would be okay. My father then asked me if this had bothered me all these years. I nodded and told him how inferior I felt every time they treated me differently and how Nina would use that to her advantage to get things going her way. I guess my father had no idea about this, so he immediately put his hand over mine and apologized. He told me that it was never his intention to do so and that he loved both his daughters equally. I then asked him if that was the case, then why did they want me to sacrifice my dream wedding for Nina, and why would they ask me to pay for her expenses when she should be the one doing so? At this point, my mother quipped in, saying how they just didn't want Nina to be embarrassed in front of the family by having such a small wedding while I would have this grand one. She continued to say how she wanted both her daughters to have a good life. I then asked her directly if it was fair for her to expect this when clearly me and Nina were not equals when it came to how much we earned or how much we saved. I reminded my parents how they have always helped Nina financially over the years while not giving me a single penny. I told them that they had no right to expect me to part with my savings just so they could feel good in front of their family. Hearing this, my mother did look apologetic and agreed that it was not unfair for them to have demanded such a thing. Over the evening, we continued to talk and open up more and more, and I have to say that I have never felt this lighter. This was the first time that I had ever told my parents exactly how miserable I was around Nina. Since our talk, my parents don't blame me anymore for not inviting them. They have apologized, although I don't know if they truly mean it or not, but I will take their word for it. I have also asked them to warn Nina about not texting me again, since I want to continue having absolutely no relationship with her whatsoever, even though my mother tried to protest at first but quickly backtracked, and they have agreed to pass along the message. Just to be sure, I will block her just like Thomas has blocked her, so she won't be able to reach me ever again. Update 3, Hi Redditors. It's been 7 months since my last update and I have the most amazing news to share. I am pregnant. Thomas and I are expecting, and I couldn't be more grateful to the universe. Becoming parents is a dream come true for both of us, and we are eager to embrace the challenges and joys that lie ahead. We are grateful for the love and support we've received from those who truly matter in our lives, and we look forward to the continued growth of our little family. My parents are ecstatic about the news as well, and so are Thomas's family. Everyone is quite excited to meet us and congratulate us, so we are throwing a little celebration this weekend. My life is good right now, and I hope anyone reading this also finds moments of happiness like these in their lives.